Hi, 6th grade. Let's go ahead and take a review of what we've done so far for our One World task and what we're going to do in the near future for completing this task. Remember that this is being assessed using the Criterion A for One World, and what we're doing is looking at scientific solutions to global issues and the impacts that these solutions have on our society, the economy, politics, the environment, culture, and ethics. All right, so let's move down into how we planned this out. The first thing that we did was, this is just my example that I gave you guys earlier. It's on the worksheet that I handed out to you. We first looked at what is the problem that we're focusing on. In my example, I'm focusing on fresh water is becoming scarce. However, with your papers, you're either focusing on the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle and looking for solutions to human impacts on those cycles. Okay, so here are my 4 different scientific solutions that I've researched and that I would like to write about in my example. However, yours are going to have to do with carbon cycle and nitrogen cycle. So after we researched some scientific solutions, we then moved towards kind of building an outline for our paper. We put each of those solutions, 1 through 4, in this sheet below. And we're also looking at the advantages of each one of those solutions and the limitations or the negative consequences of each one of those scientific solutions. And we were also discussing, not researching, but discussing what may be the impacts of our solutions, the advantage and the limitations on society, on the economy, on politics, the environment, culture, and ethics. Okay, those were parts of our discussions when we were all doing this together, our research and advantages and limitations as groups, and the impacts that they have on the society, economy, politics, environment, culture, and ethics. Okay, so now we've kind of built an outline. We've looked at what are the positive consequences or advantages of our scientific solutions, and what are the negative consequences or our limitations of our scientific solutions. Okay. So we would have listed all of those out, the 4 of them, and then I ask you to choose what you felt were the strongest 3 of those 4 solutions that you would be able to write about. All right, so now we move on to actually writing the article. This is a very important part, is making or developing your thesis statement. Your thesis statement is something that's going to work kind of like a roadmap for your article. You're actually going to let the reader know what you're going to write about without actually saying, this is what I'm going to write about, 1, 2, and 3. You're actually going to make it a sentence that catches that reader's attention and lets them know these are the 3 things to expect next in my paper in the body paragraphs which follow. Okay, so we developed this thesis that we're going to include in that introduction, the first thing that our readers will read. And I've got a scale down here for you to look at the worst and the best possible thesis statements. Okay, so the worst would be the scientific ideas or processes offer no advantages to the world at all. They are only drawbacks. Okay, terrible solutions. Then we look back at developing a thesis that includes the best possible. There are only advantages to the scientific ideas or processes, no limitations or drawbacks. Well, the worst just means that you didn't look for good solutions. The best possible would tell me that you didn't investigate enough to find those negative consequences or limitations to those solutions, because all solutions have negative consequences and drawbacks. Okay, so I'm looking for a thesis statement that does not fit into 1 or 5, but that will fit in somewhere into 2, 3, or 4, and that will help guide your paper. So a 4 would be a great one. Good, not completely good. That would mean that all the scientific idea or processes have some limitations. There are more significant advantages, and those are the types of solutions that we should be looking for. Okay, and those are the ones that you should have in your thesis statement. All right, so writing the essay, let's look at this. Your directions say to develop your introduction, which is the first thing we're going to work on. It says to briefly describe the problem or issue and list the scientific ideas or processes which address this problem or issue. That means you're going to write a general statement about the carbon cycle or about the nitrogen cycle in general, and human impacts on the carbon cycle and nitrogen cycle. Don't forget to include that. You'll also be writing about your solutions to these problems. And you'll do that whenever you create your thesis statement. So let's look what says next. In this essay, I will consider the advantages and limitations of, and then you could write the scientific ideas or processes, the solutions, with regard to, and you want to talk about social, economic, political, environmental, cultural, and ethical factors. Okay, so there's an example. You can use that stencil right there to help guide you into writing what your paper is going to be about for a good introduction. In this essay, I will argue that, and that's where you list your 3 solutions to the human impact on the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle. Right? So we've gone through that. Let's make sure that we have a good understanding here. Briefly describe the problem or issue. List scientific ideas or processes which address these problems or issues in general. Okay, not your specific ones yet. We're going to save those for the end. And then in this essay, I will consider advantages and limitations of scientific ideas or scientific solutions with regard to social, economic, political, environmental, cultural, and ethical factors. Okay? In this essay, I will argue that, and this is where you put your thesis statement, this will contain your 3 solutions, your 3 scientific solutions to the human impact on the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle. Okay? After we've gotten that done, we've got our introduction finished. We will then move down to looking at the body. Here is where we're going to take those 3 scientific solutions in the same order that you place them in the thesis statement. For example, my first body paragraph should be about desalination. We would put desalination here. And I'll let you choose between structure 1 and structure 2. If you choose structure 1, you're going to end up with 6 body paragraphs. And if you choose structure 2, then you're going to end up with just 3 body paragraphs. It's up to you. That's your choice on how you want to write this. And the reason we have that difference is because in structure 1, you're going to talk about your solution to the problem, its advantages and its limitations, or its positive and negative consequences. And then in a separate paragraph underneath that, you're going to talk about its effect or its impact on society, economy, politics, environment, culture, and ethics. Okay, so that would be 2 paragraphs for each one of your 3 solutions, making 6 body paragraphs. If you use structure 2, then you can go ahead and combine those 2 paragraphs together as they would be separate in structure 1. You make them together in structure 2. You'll actually describe the solution, talk about its benefits, its limitations, or positive and negative consequences, and then you'll discuss as well the economic benefits or the social benefits, the economic benefits, the environmental benefits, cultural or ethical benefits, or you could talk about the limitations for society, economy, politics, environment, culture, and ethics as well, all together in 1 paragraph for each one of your 3 points. Structure 2 will result in 3 body paragraphs. Structure 1 will result in 6. Neither one of those will affect your score, whether you do 6 body paragraphs or 3. What will affect your score is going to be clearly spelled out for you if you refer back to Criterion A, One World Criterion Rubric. Okay? Let's move on. The last thing we'll do, as it says in the word here, will be your conclusion. For your conclusion, you will need to very briefly summarize the main ideas of the essay and the main issue. What does that mean? You'll then talk about a little more about the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle again, sort of like you did in the introduction, but using a different structure, just very brief. Make sure that you remind your reader of the human impact on the carbon cycle or nitrogen cycle, whichever one you're working on. And then rewrite your thesis statement. You don't want to just repeat it. You want to rewrite it in a way that reminds your writer those are the 3 scientific solutions that you feel are the best. Okay, we won't be mentioning the limitations and the advantages of those solutions. We'll just be mentioning those solutions again. And then I'd like you to ask your reader at the end of your conclusion what they think about your scientific solutions to the human impact on the carbon cycle or nitrogen cycle, and whether they feel it's better that society as a whole, the world as a whole, continues to influence these two cycles in the way we're doing now, or if we begin to use your scientific solutions, which of course have advantages and disadvantages. Okay? So you're asking your reader to move into action, or do they think it's good that we stay just as we are, not taking action? All right? And that pretty much wraps it up. I hope that this video is helpful for you and that you can refer back to this over and over again, different sections of it, as you're working on your essay. And if you have any other questions, of course I'll be available for you there in class. I'll be guiding each of you through these steps. And you can also post questions onto Edmodo, and I'll be glad to answer them there. All right, thank you. And I hope you've enjoyed this video and hope it's been effective for you.